That was great. Hey, we've heard some really fascinating stories. We have a few panelists that I'd like to continue to introduce. So, Dr. Razdan, Lee, Sid, Jay, let's go down the line, introduce yourselves, and perhaps talk about what you do and what are your touch points within some of these presentations or not, as the case may be. Here's the mic.
Where do you want to start?
Go ahead.
Okay. So Rahul Razdan, I run the Mobility Institute at Florida Polytechnic University. Can you see me? Mike?
I can see you.
Can you hear me? No. It's not on.
Go to the main thing.
Or here you go. Why don't you just go?
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So so I run the AMI, which is the center at the Florida Polytechnic, which focuses on all the interesting issues that we still have with autonomous vehicles. You know, like for example, in the state of Florida, we get a lot of thunderstorms, a lot of them. Kind of interesting to see what happens with lightning with these entities and other such things. So I won't, you know, I think we have a lot more to talk about, but that's my primary focus. And I think there's a lot of exciting things going on in this space, but there's also a considerable amount of issues we have to work through before all this is real.
Go ahead, Lee.
My name is Lee Stogner. I'm here representing the world's biggest engineering professional society called the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. We are a worldwide forum of over 400,000 professionals that find ways to enhance humanity through technology and make for a better world. So along the way, many of us volunteers work on projects internal to the IEEE that are made available to the outside world to utilize to, you know, for creating things, providing solutions, a variety of things. So the things I've been involved in over the years have included the very first integration of computer systems and information technology we used to call CIM, C-I-M, Computer Integrated Manufacturing. In recent years, I was the chair of the IEEE Electrified Transportation Initiative, which brought companies and people together to talk about, well, what will it take to make an electrified car an electrified car? And within the IEEE, we have technology verticals called societies. And for our car to benefit from those societies, it took 19 of them to create the technology for making that car electric and also connected. Those societies that represent energy storage, power electronics, real-time computing, real-time networking. A lot of people, a lot of technologies that you wouldn't think individually would be a part of an electrified car, but together the technology comes together to create what you're now accepting as an electrified and connected vehicle that is becoming autonomous as well. At the core of all this stuff and of everything they've just said, there's a foundation that is comprised of standards that define how something created in the Ukraine can plug into something built here in Florida. So the standards include all those technology verticals I just mentioned, as well as a lot of other material and mechanical components, the smart cities that Jim Frazier is responsible for, and so on. So within the IEEE, we have people that work on technology, and we have people that work on the applications of technology through standards. So I'm proud to be here a part of this, and we'll be working into the future to make sure that this piece will connect to this piece and all those pieces.
Hi everybody, my name is Sid Verma. I'm in Siemens, recently joined as a global head of IoT in a city center of competence. I guess this is an introduction, so this is what I am going to do in Siemens. I haven't started it yet, but in the past tense, I was part of Deloitte Digital Industrial IoT practice. So ran multiple projects around how to make operations and technology deliver the smart, and that's my area of expertise, and hope I can contribute here.
Good afternoon. I'm Jay Lyles. I'm the project manager for Seaside Institute of the 30A Mobility Project. And where you heard from Rick about a growing new community, Seaside, Watercolor, and many of the communities along 30A have hit their zenith in their first rendition, and now we're retrofitting to the next new Seaside, the next new Watercolor, what that will look like, and how it will incorporate transportation provided by the different technologies that we're discussing here today, and how we can bring that there. I think the focus I will spend a moment on is that this brings a lot of innovation, a lot of research, development, and education. So in Walton County, for instance, you have a county that has a very affluent southern border along the coast with all these beautiful resort communities. You have a northern end of Walton County that provides the workforce that comes down to 30A to keep those homes and those resorts operating and keep that quality that is expected by the visitor and by the homeowners. What we're doing is attempting to bridge that with the economic development that comes with this kind of transportation innovation, jobs for the children of Walton County, opportunity for new development, new manufacturing industries to build the vehicles that come with these kinds of projects. And all of that has gained the attention of local government and state government to bring funding to this project to see that it occurs so that we can replicate it in many other communities across Florida. So with that, I'm going to pause now and take you all's questions with the panel.
Thanks, Jay, and thanks for all your patience. Do we have any questions before we proceed? Okay. Well, gentlemen, you'll come from very divergent backgrounds, so let me just get started. If I want to plan a smart city, how do I start? Where do I go first? What happens? That's probably a Joachim and a Jay question.
Yeah, so I mean, first, what is important is this. I think we heard from Babcock Range. It's a greenfield approach, right? It's a new development. So the first question is: are we going into an existing city that has to be modified? Or are we building something completely new, right? So if it's... Is this better? Okay. So I just said is the approach really depends on whether we have an existing city or whether we are doing a greenfield approach like in Babcock Range. What I mentioned about 30A as an existing structure that was, I think, developed over 30 years, right?
Right, so say,
you need to first think it through. How do I actually modify the flow of the traffic? So I know smart city is more than transportation, so I'm more qualified to talk about transportation. But I would really first start with the parking. I would think about how do I reroute these the people that are either working there, because you mentioned that workforce mobility. We know all that problem with the commuter. They are living somewhere else. They have to go to their jobs, so they spend too much time in traffic congestion. They have problem finding parking. So the first thing you have to figure out, how can I reduce the travel time and searching for parking. So that's the first thing you have to start when you...
Well, Joachim, that's great, because later in the week we have both a smart parking and a mobility as a service session.
Yeah. And mobility as a service, as you said, is am I driving my own car, or do I have a service where I don't need my own car? Or I just need my own car maybe until their first parking area, and then from then on I do something
Well,
different.
I mean, I informally stated it as what do you do first, but it really is more formally stated as, you know, what's a recommended or suggested planning process to do what you want to do. And early on, I presented, you know, the US DOT technical perspective of how you do that. You know, that's what you need to do to get federal highway or federal transportation agency dollars, but it's quite rigid. Is that a suggested way to go? Is that too heavy or too light?
That's not
Rick?
far off the model, though, that we've used at Seaside, and that first left-hand side of your V is the outreach. If you're going to start somewhere, you've got to start with the people who live, own those homes, and use those facilities as vacationers to find out what they want.
Rick, let me ask you. You're nodding, but nodding, but you don't have a mic.
No, I'm nodding because if you don't start with the stakeholders, you have to start with the stakeholders. You have to understand, and we talked about that, I think, in yesterday's session too, is hearing from the stakeholders and helping define. You're never going to please 100% of the people, but if you don't give them a voice, you're going to learn something in the process also in terms of wants and needs. And if you don't start there, you're going to be too far gone and spend a lot of money without getting their voice in terms of where you should spend your money.
Well, exactly. I think it's phrased as, I like phrasing it as the problems that you identify earlier are far less costly to fix, and no one wants to build the bridge and then have the bike people say, hey, you forgot the bike lane.
Yeah, so I think one thing is really important, and that is the safety side, right? And so if you are starting to have self-driving vehicles, the safety assessment needs to be a priority. But the question is, how do I, because you also mentioned planning, so how do I do that? So if I have a dedicated lane and I have maybe during the dedicated lane, I have nobody interfering that lane, so you don't have pedestrians going over that lane. It's a very different situation like what we had in Seaside with a lot of people crossing 38, right? So you need to start identifying where are the safety risks and which process do I apply to do this risk assessment. So that needs to be something that has to come pretty early. Right, in the planning process.
True. Go ahead, Jay.
And I've got to piggyback on what Rick said about the fun factor. One of my early lessons in setting up this project in Seaside was a comment that the founder, Robert Davis, said. He said, I want this system to be so fun that when people come to Seaside, their children say, I want to ride on that. When you get the kids of your visitors saying, I want to ride on that, we win. They're going to be on our vehicles after that. They'll never touch their car again the whole time they're there.
Well, not to be too dry about this, but that middle pillar of sustainability is human quality of life.
Sure.
And in my world, fun's in that bucket.
Oh, you bet.
Go ahead, Sid. Microphone.
So I give you a consulting answer.
Can you hear? Yes, we can.
Try that one.
Oh, you got one. Okay. Half the mic still. Brought my home. So basically what inside Siemens and my personal experience has been to look what cities do. Cities provide services to people, and everything that you have talked about is a service. And sometimes you get a chance to do a new one, sometimes a net new technology which has changed, like a service, like an electric car. But most of the time you look at a continuous improvement of what it is. So from a consulting point of view, what you do to make things smarter is you're already doing something which is kind of smart in 5-year-old terms or 10-year-old terms. And you, as you were talking about, looking at what will it make it better. So if you are a user of DMV services, how can you make it better? Like, can you make the operational process faster by automating some of the steps? And I mean, from my view, cities have been there for hundreds of years, and technologies change, processes update. It's just looking at each of those elements from an operations perspective. Operations include like how it is run from the people who are using it, to the technology that is driving it, and the elements that support it, and then sometimes make drastic changes. Most of the time you make small changes, like which is.
I want to introduce a thought, which a lot of people are talking about asking the constituents what do they want, and sometimes people don't know what they want because they don't know what's possible. And so that's something that on the private industry side, people understand and will often offer solutions in such a way that things are enabled when people didn't even think about it. It was not something that was asked for, it was just something that was provided. Let me give you a kind of just an example that we all use the transportation system. And we pretty much view it as a free resource that we access at any time. And in that sense, it has this characteristic that there's shortages, there's congestion, and there's really no process to modulate that based on what my need to use it, my economic need to use it. When you start having electronics in the system, you can start actually thinking about much deeper economic concepts than we are able to do today. Because right now, really, the whole thing is controlled by signage and civil infrastructure and tolling.
No, you're right.
So all I'm really saying is, all of this is great, but when you start thinking about this at the next level, really much more enormous changes are possible. And it's hard to ask people what that world will look like because they don't know what it looks like until it gets there.
Well, I think there is. Go ahead.
To give you an example because I also want to touch on user behavior and change of user behavior. Give you an example with Seaside. When you are a visitor, a lot of people, the first thing they do, they go to the supermarket. So they drive to the supermarket, shop their goods, and bring it to the house. So if I have a mobility as a service approach and I can basically have this delivered to me or pre-stocked, it would already have a major impact.
Well, Joachim, that brings up a great point that goes along with Rahul's, that user need, foundationally, you need to know what the customers want.
Yeah.
The customers might not themselves know what is possible.
Yes.
So it takes a bit of artwork and you have to be an artful questioner and allow long narratives to evolve. And maybe you phrase it as, what's your biggest problem? If in a perfect world you were all powerful, what would you fix? And sometimes you have to ask these somewhat creative, non-engineering type questions.
In our planning process, we call it a shredding process. And to Rahul's, we actually pose thesis. We give thesis for them to vet. We already know where we want to go, but we actually have to get folks on board. And so it isn't completely open-ended. The charrette process is you're trying to prove out your thesis one way or another. And you have to do that in the planning stages. So I don't think Rahul is saying that it is completely open-ended. That wouldn't be successful because that would take forever. But you have general ideas of what you want to do and how you think it will affect human behavior or how it will benefit them. You pose those in ways where you get critical feedback.
That's great. Now, the title of this, Lee, I'm coming to you. The title of this is Smart City Best Practices. So, look, a smart city isn't that different than a lot of other systems out there. It's just another system. I'm familiar with a lot of the transportation development standards, that V model, the way the US DOT does it. I'm somewhat involved in the IEEE, but I'd like to go to Lee. I know you have been involved with IEEE, electric vehicle electrification standards, as well as a couple of others. I think that there might be one that you're publishing very soon that might have an effect here. Is it the digital transformation standard?
I'm listening to people talk about building large projects with multiple vendors, lots of different ideas. That's good. That encourages innovation. But at the end of the day, the structures that are being built have to meet standards that become building codes and other local regulations to make sure it can stand up to the weather that Florida is famous for.
Hold on. That might be better.
So, and there's potentially some vendors that you have to keep honest. So, rules and regulations without going overboard are needed on every project, especially the big projects, to make sure everything comes together and has a safety rating and the allowances for the things it takes to make sure things can be built properly and last for a long time. But you mentioned IEEE again. One of the standards families that we're working on right now is what we call SCC 42. It's a family of standards that will help to protect and govern the design of electric vehicles, whether they're built here or built anywhere in the world. And it covers powertrains, electronics, and connectivity, communications, all the things that we're expecting to come forth in a electric and connected world. So yes, we're not trying to stand in the way. We just want to make sure that people are kept safe. We've heard kids mentioned a few times, and that the vehicle does indeed work the way we expect it to.
You started this session with the question of how do you start, right? And how do you look at this problem? Let me I'll give you my perspective on what we mean by smart. I think what we mean by smart is the revolution that's happening is electronics and software. That's the revolution. That is getting infused into nearly everything. And really the question we're asking is, okay, in the existing processes we have, in the future processes we can't even conceive of, which fundamentally change what we're doing, how do we look at these things intersecting? And that may not be a bad way to just look at, if you're open field looking at something, how is this stuff that's going on over here affecting, how do we fundamentally change what's going on? And delivery is one example, but there's lots of others where you start getting into concepts of micro-tolling, right? Just to give you an idea, we're talking about apps. Maybe the app you ought to have is, I really need to get to the airport. Here's 20 bucks. Maybe there's micro-tolling where I communicate with the cars ahead of me and say, I'll give you some money to get out of the way. Just idea, right? You get into the tolling structures where that's a form of taxation, where the lighting goes in your direction. What that starts doing is putting market-based forces relative to the transportation system, right? So all sorts of things, when you get to the next level, you can conceive of, and it's really the fundamentals of it is, it's electronics and software intersecting with the existing process and future processes we're getting to. And that's not a bad place to start if you're going to start thinking in the future.
That's great. That's great.
What I wanted also to mention is zoning regulations. So for example, I had a discussion with a community that was on an island that had connections to the mainland with bridges, and they were thinking about, and that was in South Carolina, so they were thinking about a new parking concept, but the zoning regulations didn't allow what they wanted to do. So you need to have the willingness of the lawmakers to say, well, this is a pilot area, maybe we allow them exceptions. So that room for experimentation is very, very important to learn from that, share with others, and then iterate through.
Well, again, I pound that drum about stakeholder involvement and elected officials and all of that. You know, if you come to them early enough and allow them to participate, then those barriers are minimum. They're not eliminated, but they're a little bit less. Go ahead.
So, is it off? Yeah, it's on. It's on. Okay, so on the fringe of this, though, I think discussion is going on in Florida, and we'll begin to ramp up, is how to use these kinds of technologies and this approach to smart cities to help people both evacuate before storms happen and then recover after the storm. But for the grace of God, Seaside sits right next to an area that got wiped out during Hurricane Michael. And we're now aware that we have an opportunity when we rebuild in Bay County to rebuild in a way that uses technology to help people figure out how to more quickly get away from the hazards that are going to come in the future and how to recover much more quickly when we come back.
Okay, let me ask this. So obviously the promise here includes small devices everywhere. Okay, the internet, not of things, but of everything. That then introduces the problem of cybersecurity, because anyone could conceivably attack any one of these devices. What are best practices in terms of cybersecurity?
Best practices.
Maybe from a vehicle perspective, maybe from IoT perspective.
So right now, there is, in the automotive industry, there is a community called Auto ISAC that is actually sharing best practices in a community. And what I was told is that certain attack forms they don't want to discuss in a public environment. So they can then at least exchange information how can they protect themselves against these kind of attacks. What I think is important is that we need to get to, similar to what we do on the safety assessment side, to a really standardized security assessment side, so assessment process. Agreed. And it right now it's a little bit, when you talk to different vendors, then they say, well, I can do this cybersecurity risk assessment, but they can only do it within their tool platform and their systems. You need independent third-party service providers that can bring these different systems together in a configuration that is relevant for a specific smart city. And the smart city could then say, look, I want to be protected. This third party could go in and say, okay, let's replicate your situation. Let's go maybe start with a simulation. Let's do certain hardware in the loop tests and so forth. But this is the path, but we are not there yet. Right.
Sid.
Sure. So cybersecurity kind of topic has been there since IT has been there, correct? Like, it's not new. So IT guys started making applications. So you have web security, like in the sense of authentication by user password.
Right.
That has gone a little bit ahead, that those soft user codes and passwords are now to a level that you cannot hack in or break in by simple brute force. On the OT side, where the equipment was running, what they did was they made their own network, disconnected it from the rest of the world, and it's called like firewall for a reason, and then they air-gapped it, so you can't get in, and that was the reason. And they blocked all the USB ports and they disconnected everything else, and that was before IoT IP-enabled sensors came out.
Right.
And now the whole world is saying, hey, let's connect it, because IT has moved ahead in data analysis, and we can show them, the OT guys, how to do it. And the sensors are cheap enough that I can tell a sensor to do something that will run like a sprinkler system. Cybersecurity problem has kind of, what's happening is OT guys haven't figured that much out. Don't beat me up on that. The IT guys haven't. So the IT guys have gone way far, but then it's remained close to the IT protocols. And I'm sure IEEE might have a better answer than mine. But what they're doing is they're passing over the same protocols and the learnings and the operation process over to the OT world. Where what we do is once you connect a sprinkler system, which has sensors which control and controller, you want to make sure you follow the 7-step or 9-step checklist, and you can kind of get rid of 90% of the problems.
Right.
Which is like, make sure the port's not open, you can't just put an IP address of a router and get in. Those simple stuff you can get over it. And then how Yakin was saying, you don't want to talk about some of the stuff.
Right.
Because then people get ideas, correct? And a lot of will be new challenges, correct? Like, you cannot port everything over from the IT world to the OT world. We will make new stuff, which is like evaluation of this, how the network is going in the OT world, and look for anomalies. So that's what they do in IT when they look for like anomalies in the traffic pattern, is like, why did that packet came over from Ukraine? Like, we were getting all the data from you, something's wrong. And then you patch your firewall and you solve it.
Do you have a question?
Oh.
Yeah. And I think maybe we can move on to the question you've got.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I live, so I'm going to ask you all for your advice on something, and I'll lay out the scenario. So I live in a township in Pennsylvania. It's not a new township. It's been around for hundreds of years. It wasn't well laid out or anything. And some of the types of technology initiatives we have are like putting in fiber optic cable between street signals to get them aligned with the PennDOT system for better traffic control. Another type of smart city project for us might be having interoperability between the radios of the local police and EMS along with county. So very much basic blocking and tackling. To get a bike path in a road is very difficult just because of the, geometry of things, because these are older roads. So my question to the panel is, as I try to drive some things related to smarter cities moving forward, electrification, things like that, what are practical things that you would recommend, I bring forward that we can do now? One of the ones you mentioned was you have, electric car charging station in each garage. So that's very practical. That could be built into, land development requirements. So what are some of the things you think we should be thinking about right now that are practical?
I'll go first, gentlemen. Altoona, Pennsylvania, is that very different from where you live?
It's Philadelphia suburbs.
Okay. The mayor of Altoona was classic. He knew he needed something, but he didn't know what. So he actually came and started a dialogue with some vendors about having kiosks, public informational wayfinding kiosks downtown. Upon questioning him, his real need was, well, he wanted Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi downtown, and he thought that would be a base to mount Wi-Fi devices. Well, it really came down to when you started questioning and having those creative questions. Allentown has a small downtown college campus of Penn State. It has another larger one up the road 2 or 3 miles away. Both have huge fiber connections paid for by the state of Pennsylvania. The town is mostly concerned that there are 6,000 high-wage machinist-type jobs that are typically held by people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And if they don't do much in town, those jobs are going to vanish and never come back. So his real initiative is he created in his own head, ended up being, look, I need to keep the millennials in town. So how do I do that? So from his original kiosk vision, he went to, I'm going to turn my street lighting, I'm going to convert it from HPS to LED, saving $10 a month on his 3,000 streetlights. With those dollars, he's going to extend the fiber from the downtown campus around the downtown so that he's got very fast Wi-Fi for the college kids. And he'll put out 1 or 2 kiosks just so the town looks a little bit trendier and cooler. The LED lighting saves energy. It's more full spectrum, so everything, the town, the older buildings look better, and there's better visual acuity for safety. And he added a few crosswalk countdown buttons. So almost at a revenue impact of 0, he got a lot done at a cost of 0. Some crosswalks, a kiosk, new street lights, and Wi-Fi and fiber. So it's not always these giant Chicago, or City of Detroit kind of projects. That was one mayor that just had a lot more fire and passion for it than he had originally raw information, but he was able to find the right people, get the right user needs, and find out what he needed to do. And I think that's a great little story. I mean, do you guys have ones like that?
Well, I want to say you're right. You get your local government involved first. You make sure they're educated about what your intentions are, and it makes things a lot easier, especially when they begin to adopt those as their agenda. But 2 basics of local government I have learned from this is protect your right-of-ways and protect your public spaces, and add to your public spaces whenever your city is, for instance, reclaiming a wet area that can no longer support housing. They're going to tear down a house. You want to make sure that public space remains public space, because that's where you're going to put your infrastructure. So on 30A, we have a lot of instances in which homeowners have decided that they want to put a driveway and horticulture in on the right-of-way. And when you go back and then tell them, no, you can't do that because we need that as a multi-use path, you get very agitated about that. And what you'll find is if you just immediately make sure that your local government is protecting its right-of-way, you're going to have a lot easier time making these kinds of changes.
Do we have any other questions?
I'll give you a consulting answer, so don't beat me back. So,
Hire him. No.
which could be an answer after we can discuss. But usually when we go to a client or a city, like typically you ask for what are your problems, correct? Like, because I have learned like not all companies are the same, not all cities are the same, and the problems are different. So I'm in California. Suddenly, environment in summer has become a huge topic. Like people want to see, like, hey, can I monitor my own neighborhood environment? So like the suggestion from my side would be like a general benchmarking on what are the people wanting in the neighborhood and what can be done. I mean, what Jim provided was a pretty structured, layered process of like kind of go by the LED, then go the Wi-Fi, and a lot of cities have taken the route. So well-defined route in the sense of ROI, but it could be other things that could be done. And from my perspective, like the area of like the data management software and applications have become more democratic in the nature. It's easier to do, like much, much, much easier to do. Like from my time in Pratt & Whitney where I had to make a control system, could cost me $10 million. I mean, I'm guessing Texas Instruments sells for like $40 now. So something like that is where you kind of target lighting, accidents are happening, and tactical solutions that kind of embeds into the city's operations and improves it. Like look for those gaps and target that.
How about, I heard a number of panelists talk about the virtue of open APIs, but how about the related issues of interoperability, of the benefits of even a proprietary system, as well as the standards that wrap around all of those? Because interoperability is great. It drives commoditization, prices fall, but then you've got a plethora of different things plugged together, and you don't know what's the offending part that doesn't work.
It's easy for me. It was
Go
all
ahead.
about dollars.
Yeah.
Right? We have to bolt on with people with an open API. I don't have the financial wherewithal to build those platforms and have them, operate completely independent. We just don't have the capital to do that. So we have to use others that already have that software, that have the ability. We're still working on who owns the data, and in some instances we share the information between whoever the API bolt-on is, but we just didn't have the capital to be able to do it ourselves and keep it completely contained.
So I'll give you industry example of open APIs, and that has kind of become a default go-to-market for most of the vendors. Usually you will have different areas in your industry or a company like warehouse management, supply chain, water management. They will have a system which actually does this thing, but more and more they need information from others, and they have to give information to others. And that has kind of created a in and out API standard. So you provide a gateway for people to take your stuff, information, that won't be released. And it has kind of become standard for like a software and hardware vendors. Otherwise, you will be considered like a pariah in the sense of like, I can't deal with you. Like, what happens if somebody doesn't work afterwards?
Exactly. I know we're a little bit over time, so we'll take one more question.
All right.
Go ahead.
I just have a quick question. I have a lot of family in the Bay County area, which was ground zero for Hurricane Michael, and everyone's excited for the possible new infrastructure. But on that same token, everyone's concerned about with increased infrastructure brings gentrification. Is there any ethical obligations you guys feel that you have to balance between developing and preserving the communities that are already there?
I guess that's directed at me because I'm the one that's the closest to the local situation, and I fully understand what you're saying. So Mexico Beach is a classic example. Mexico Beach is made up of pretty middle-class people who've been there for years. They've had their little cottages. It's not the high-rises and the big resorts that you see scattered across Florida. And their approach to it has been a total building moratorium until they have a vision of what they want Mexico Beach to do. But the answer is different for different areas. And, there's a strong private property rights ethic in North Florida. So when confronted with the idea that I had a $40,000 cottage on the beach, and if I've got to replace it, I got to replace it with a $250,000 home built to the new standards, a lot of people are expected to sell their property. And that's a story that's going to unfold, but it's going to be quite a game changer for that part of the world.
All right, I know we're a few minutes over. Does anyone want to sum up, make a few last minute comments? All right. Well, I know everyone's anxious to get out of here and probably eat or have a drink. So I thank all of you. You're a wonderful panel, just absolutely wonderful. And all of you, thanks for being here.
I'd like to say one final thing. We've heard about how this and that affect where you're going. Stay involved in your local government. They don't always have the best knowledge with respect to technology. Help them understand it and make sure that everyone does the right thing, because they're talking to each other and they're trying to be all one community.
Yeah, good thought.
All right, thank you, everyone.